Well, Christy and I we didn't see eye to eye, you could say. She was close friends with one of my roommates. I was in college. It was my freshman year of college. I was new to the idea of walking with Jesus, and I really wasn't afraid to tell people about it. I wasn't confrontational, but I would tell many people about Jesus, and Christy had strong opinions about that. You can't talk about that. I was trying to hold a Bible study. It just happened to be in her dorm at the time, and I got permission to put up some posters for the Bible study, welcomed anybody who wanted to attend, and Christy put a lot of effort into trying to get those posters taken down. Ugh. Really? Well, sometimes one of the best things about sophomore year in college is you get to put some of those old experiences behind. You get to experience new faces. You get to experience a different perspective even. I was starting a new job as an RA, and surprise, surprise, Christy was also starting the same job, and she was going to be on my team also. Have you ever had to work with somebody or go to school with somebody or even go to church with someone that you felt was so difficult or so different that when you got up in the morning, you just really kind of didn't want to go? Well, today we are starting a new series. It's called Grit and Grace. Got to get the order right. Not grits and grace, grit and grace. It turns out that God invites us to dream about a future that is bigger than we could ever imagine. And we'll be diving into the book of Romans to learn more about that over the next few weeks. Next week, we're going to take a pause for Vision Sunday. We're going to dive a little bit into our mission as a church, but then we'll come back to this series, and Pastor Joshua at Grace will pick it up after that. But what do you do when that positive future seems muddled by the people right in front of you, or right in front of us? Maybe for some of you, that's somebody at work who is constantly looking over your shoulder, kind of waiting for you to fail. Or perhaps it's maybe it's somebody at your mom's group, always reminding you either directly or by their perfect lives that you're insufficient as a mom. Or maybe it's a brother or sister who's always doing disappointing things, or maybe doing things to hurt you directly. I don't know about you, but when I think of the kind of person that I want to be, the kind of person that I aspire to be, I think of a person that rises above all of that. It's better than all of those circumstances. But the truth is that when I am confronted by them, when I come face to face with them, I'm often so caught up in the moment that it's hard to think or feel the right way, or to think or feel the way that I want to feel about those. What we're going to talk about today is important because the way that we deal with different or difficult people determines not just the kind of people we will be, but it also really determines the kind of life that we will have, the kind of life that we will have. Jesus said a lot of controversial things, but perhaps one of the more overlooked controversial things he stated was here in Matthew chapter 5, verses 46 through 47. If you love those who love you, what reward do you get? If you greet only your own people, what are you doing more than others? Well, chances are most of us want to do good for those around us. And when Jesus presses us on these statements, when he presses us to love outside of our tribe, he is certainly appealing to the desire within us to do good for others, to do good for those around us. But is there more than that? Genuine love is generous. It does not stop with this person. It doesn't stop with those people. Those who really have genuine love allow it to flow. They are, I'll put it this way, they're undivided in their spirits. But those who love selectively are internally split. They go one way in one circumstance and they go another way in another circumstance. That's why this is so important. Peace and joy. Peace and joy are experienced when our lives are undivided, when our spirits are undivided. Angst, insecurity, and instability, those are the kind of experiences we have when we're living the other way. So, if loving those who are different and difficult is not just important for those that we encounter, but it's also important for the condition of our hearts. If that's important, how do we get there? How do we get there? And how can we overcome our natural impulses to turn the other way? How can we be undivided in our love among people whom we are so, or can be so divided about? Well, we aren't the first to ask this question. And it just so happens that in some of the first days after Jesus left the church physically, that this was probably one of the biggest challenges that the church was wrestling with the whole time. Romans is one of the most important letters in all of the Bible. It really is. Throughout history, it has changed the lives of people who have changed the world. In the 3rd, 4th century, Augustine was changed by reading this letter, and that helped shape and form some of the early creeds of the church. 1,000 years later, this letter caused a Reformation and a counter-Reformation. It contains some of the biggest ideas about God, including this one, that while we were yet sinners, God still loved us. God still loved us while we were yet sinners. It carries and includes this idea that we have been justified freely by his grace. Some of the big ideas of the faith. Yet was Paul just writing some of these big ideas just to get them on paper, or was there something stirring in Rome at the time that gave these ideas an important home? Was there a reason that he was writing this? Well, back in Rome, the term Christian was still kind of new. People who followed Jesus, especially who came from a Jewish background, they considered themselves, they still considered themselves Jews. But the message of Jesus, it was breaking out into the non-Jewish world among non-Jews, whom in the Bible they're known as Gentiles. They were receiving the message. They were deciding, hey, we're going to follow Jesus too. And they started reading the Jewish scriptures and living parts of them out. Now, they didn't have a Jewish heritage, and they didn't practice all of the Jewish customs, and that raised a lot of controversy, and that raised a lot of conversation in the church, but, they weren't quite the same. What do we call these people now? Like, what's a name for them? Now, in another letter, Paul addresses that, and he says that what used to be two groups are now one, and he calls that one group the new man. And that's important because they have equal standing before God spiritually, both Jews and non-Jews or Gentiles. So everything should be good between the two groups, right? Everything should be perfect. Not exactly. Hard memories, they don't fade easily, do they? Hard memories like one from a Jewish boy's childhood where he walked alongside a Roman centurion nailing one of his fellow Jews to a cross. Hard memories of Gentiles mocking Jewish people because of their faith, or even hard memories of seeing the sometimes what would have been considered scandalous or offensive things that Gentiles would do that would have offended their sensibilities. All that to say, things weren't as easy as we might imagine them to be. Now, one Gentile isn't the same as every Gentile, but the truth is our brains, they take shortcuts, especially when our safety is at stake. They take shortcuts, and it's hard to fight stereotypes, even for us today. Well, Rome was at the center of the world back then. It was like a combination between New York City and Washington, D.C. Economically, politically, it was at the center. And Rome wasn't Jewish, but Rome did have some Jews there because of an event where many Jews were sent all over the world called the diaspora. But faithful Jews, when they could, attempted to go back to Jerusalem for certain important feasts like the Passover. And that was around the time of Jesus' death and some of the feasts that followed. So, it just so happens, there were some Jews from Rome all the way over in Jerusalem when the apostles were preaching. They heard this message about Jesus. The Holy Spirit descended. These people were changed. So they left Jerusalem after the festivals. They went back to Rome. They shared this good news about Jesus, and more of their fellow Jews were changed. And all of a sudden, halfway across the known world at the time, a little group of believers pops up in the epicenter of the known world at the time. Well, just because this church sprung up, well, chances are it didn't mean that they were all of a sudden warming their hearts to their metropolitan neighbors all around them. And Paul, who was probably writing from Corinth, about halfway in between, roughly, at the time, he had this to say. I long to see you so that I may impart some spiritual gift to make you strong. That is, that you and I may be mutually encouraged by one another's faith. I do not want you to be unaware, brothers and sisters, that I planned many times to come to you, but have been prevented from doing so until now, in order that I might have a harvest among you, just as I have had among the other Gentiles. Do you see how Paul just comes right out with his intentions near the beginning of this letter? He wants the people in Rome, some of whom he probably knew, some of whom he didn't. He wants them to know kind of what he's planning to do. He wants to be an encouragement to them, and he wants them to be an encouragement to him. He's kind of setting an equal standing between the two. But did you notice that he also stresses some other intentions too? I do not want you to be unaware. Paul wants to spread the message of Jesus to Gentiles around this group of Jews, just like he had in other places. Why do you think Paul would want to make this very plain at the outset? Could it be that this group was less than thrilled about the idea of getting the message of Jesus out to the Gentiles that they were living around? Well, Paul doubles down, showing that this is his calling. I am obligated both to Greeks and non-Greeks, both to the wise and the foolish. That is why I am so eager to preach the gospel also to you who are in Rome. Wait a minute. Preach the gospel to this Roman church? Preach the message of Jesus to this Roman church? Don't they already know it? Isn't that the reason that this church was started up halfway across the world? Yes, but Paul is eager to unpack, follow me here, a part of it. He wants them to know a part of it for a special reason. Here's what he says. For I am not ashamed of the gospel, because it's the power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes, first to the Jew, then to the Gentile. For in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, a righteousness that is by faith, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Power, salvation, righteousness, faith. Those are all really big ideas. And if you're like me, reading some of those, you probably have some questions about how those ideas connect to one another. And what Paul is going to say shortly will make some of that a little bit more clear. But did you notice that emotional word that he used before all of that? Did that word unashamed stand out to you too? Maybe you can sense this possible hesitancy that the Roman Jews had in reaching out to their neighbors. And don't take my word for it. Let's look at the very end of the letter, some of the things that he says that kind of hints the same thing. He says, accept one another to bring praise to God, that the Gentiles might glorify God for his mercy, in Romans 15, 7 and 9. And then he also says a little bit later in verses 15 through 16, I have written you quite boldly on some points to remind you of them again because of the grace of God, the grace God gave me to be a minister of Christ Jesus to the Gentiles. To the Gentiles. Now, obviously, these differences and these difficulties between these two groups of people, they weren't benign. They weren't benign. They were causing division. The church was struggling to accept people who were different and sometimes maybe even difficult. But Paul is not ashamed of the message because it's not just for the Jews. It's for everyone. It's for everyone. And this message, it brings, did you catch this? It brings righteousness. Something that the Jewish people thought that the Gentile people were devoid of. It brings righteousness to everyone. To everyone. What happens next is it's really critical, and we'll get there, but what I want to do is I just want to pause on the problem for a moment, because it's easy to oversimplify the solution to some of our difficulties and differences. It's really easy to do that, and it's easy to maybe rely on short-term solutions instead of something that's longer and meaningful. Remember the girl Christy that I mentioned at the beginning? Well, I remember one time during a training, a special staff training, it was kind of this kind of get to know you, grow deeper as a team, that Christy shared a little bit of her story. And I won't share all of the details here, but on a trip overseas, Christy was hurt. Christy was hurt physically. And the results of that, for whatever reason and for all of the details that happened, was that she ended up mistrusting people of faith even more because of what happened in those circumstances. And truthfully, after hearing that, I felt bad. I felt bad. I kind of looked at her in a new light. And there was some sense of empathy, I think, that came from that also. But there are a few problems if we just rely on a deeper knowledge of people to help us connect with them. Maybe the first problem is really obvious to you. Sometimes we simply don't know what people have gone through in order to kind of create this connection or this sense of empathy. That's the first problem. Sometimes when we get to know people even more, it's sometimes even harder to find something to connect with them or to find a reason for their bad behavior. And here's the third one, and this is important. Knowing can stir empathy, but it can also stir in us pity. it can also stir in us pity. And pity makes us feel bad for people, but it also kind of makes us look down on people. It strengthens a sense of superiority in us. It in kind of this backward way, and we may not realize it at the time, it makes us feel like we're better than those people. The pity doesn't build a connection. Pity puffs up. It puffs up. And that's why what Paul is going to say is so important. And let me summarize a little bit because he says a lot. First, Paul, what he does next is he brings out this laundry list of sins that the Gentiles are guilty of. And he doesn't do it so much to beat up on the Gentiles. He does it to say to his Jewish friends, hey, look, I'm not saying that these things are bad. They are bad. We are on the same page. But then Paul does the old switcheroo, and he turns his attention to the Jews. And he said, here's the problem. Those very same things that you accuse them of, you do the same things. You're doing the same things. Now, it may not have been that they were doing exactly the same things, but maybe they thought of doing the same things. Maybe they desired to do the same things. Maybe they were doing some of the same kinds of things in the same category. And Paul digs a little bit deeper because he says, look, not only are you doing the same kinds of things, but you're accusing them for doing the same things that you do. Whoa. And here's where Paul lands. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God. There is no difference. Maybe you've heard this expression, there is nothing certain but death and taxes. Paul would have added one more. Sin is certain. It makes us all the same. It makes us all the same. When I first moved to Dallas, I took some time to find a new church to be a part of. And when I met Pastor Andy, I immediately liked him. And I don't remember everything about his preaching, maybe more his voice and demeanor, but I do remember one story that he shared on several occasions that always made me smile. And it was about a basketball game. He played pickup basketball frequently at the gym. And in one scenario, things got a little bit ugly. The guy guarding him was guarding him a little too well. Some fouls were exchanged. I don't remember all the details. Was Andy pushed to the ground? But Pastor Andy got up and he threw the first punch. And a fight ensued. And it didn't sound too pretty. Pastor Andy and his pious punches, right? His sermon strikes back. Pastor Muhammad Andy. That's just an image I couldn't get out of my head. Now, I've never thrown a punch that I remember. But I have punched people with my words. And I have punched people in my heart. What Pastor Andy was sharing at the time wasn't to glorify what he did. It was to share with me and everyone else there sitting in the audience that we were the same. All of us. We're all sinners. We're all broken. And I remember in that moment, as kind of funny as it wasn't undermining the seriousness of what happened. I just remembered in that moment that I just felt like I wasn't lower than him. I wasn't higher than him. I was with him. I was like him. There is no difference. Sin is the great equalizer. But do you know how Paul continues? And all are justified freely by his grace through the redemption that came by Jesus Christ. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his righteousness, because in his forbearance, he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time so as to be just and the one who justifies those who have faith in Jesus. When Jesus was nailed to the cross, all of the sins of the world were nailed on him. If God is fair, if God is just, what Paul is saying is that he can't let sin go unpunished. He can't let sin go unpunished, and he didn't. His son freely accepted the punishment of sin. So God in that moment became two things. He became just because he didn't let sin go unpunished. But he also became the justifier, the one who made people right with God. He became just and the justifier to those who received Jesus by faith. All people have a chance to stand clean before God. All people have that chance. And all a person has to do is trust and believe to receive. We all have the same potential, no matter how bad our bad is, no matter where we come from, no matter what our resources are. Do you know why salvation is by grace through faith instead of by our efforts, instead of us trying to do things? Well, Paul is going to state at least one of the reasons in the next verse, but I think he says it a little bit more clearly in one of his other letters, and it's simply this. In Ephesians 2:9, it's so that no one can boast. So that no one can boast. There is no boasting in either. There's no pride. There is no better resources. There is no, I am smarter, I'm more righteous, I'm in better shape, I'm richer. There's no, I'm more educated. No, I have a better job. No, I'm a harder worker. No, I grew up in a better place. There's no, I have a better resume. No, I have better parents. No, I have a nicer car. No, I have a better spouse. There's no, I have a nicer home. There's no more, I'm more talented. There's no, I am much stronger. There's no, I'm wiser. There's no, I'm better looking. There's no, I am more important. There's no, I am more needed. Look, there are differences in the world. Some of them God has created, and not all differences are bad. There are many, many differences that are good, beautiful, and meaningful. Our likes are different, our habits are different, our backgrounds, our thoughts, our feelings, our gifts. God doesn't wash away our differences. He doesn't wash them away, but when we view ourselves primarily in terms of our relationships, our relationship with God, those differences, they don't matter, or at least they matter less. When we identify with Christ, with God first, no person is better than the next. Sin makes everyone a pauper. Grace makes us all kings and queens. All the differences that come between us, they're not much more than a facade. And when the facade, when it goes away, walls, they can come down because we can see people with new eyes. We're not afraid to cross cultural boundaries. We're not afraid to engage and love those who might have said hurtful things to us in the past. And because we're not different, we're not better. We hurt people too, and God accepts us anyway. Since sin and grace encounter us all the same, we can move into anyone's life without shame. Well, a couple months ago, some families from Christchurch went on a special trip out west to West Virginia to serve people and to serve people that are a little different than them, come from a little bit of a different place than them. So since it's Family Sunday, I wanted to invite one of our kids up who experienced that. Soraya, would you come up and would you give her a warm welcome? So, Soraya, can you tell us a little bit about your trip? What did you do?
Well,
It's on.
we went to this homeless shelter where we were prepping food, we served the food, we helped organize like their storage and clean their parking lot, and we got to talk and meet people.
That's awesome. And it sounds like you met some people that are different than you. Is that right?
We met this one guy named John, and he could only stay at the homeless shelter for so long. He was trying to find a new job, but there wasn't much place he could go to.
What would you tell some of us who might be a little bit afraid of meeting or reaching out to people who are different than us?
That you should always remember that God is with you, and then you'll be all right.
Give her a round of applause. It's a bright future, right? So when you think of somebody that you would rather not see, first, who comes to mind? And can you imagine something different? Can you, for just a moment, think of your own failings and think about how that might connect us to that person even more? And also not just your own failings, but the grace of God that's been showered upon your life. How can that connect us? How can that connect us too? Could that knowledge help you lower walls and truly set you free? In your mind's eye, and that, you can close your eyes if it's helpful, but would you be against just to kind of imagining this situation with me? I want you to just picture yourself with a pen in your hand and a piece of paper in front of you. You can feel the pen. You can feel its weight. You can see the sheet in front of you. You can see the white paper. You can feel its texture. You can see the lines across it. Just for a moment, I want you to look at that top line, and I want you to write the name of someone who maybe is difficult in your life right now. Or if not difficult, different. Different. I want you to, after you've written that down, to just underline it. And now make a list. What are some of the things that make that person difficult? Or what are some of the things that cause tension in the relationship? Maybe they're just simple differences. Write them down, name them, let them be seen by your eyes. See the ink as it's coming out of the pen. Look at the color. Now that you've seen that, I just direct your eyes to the top right of the paper. There should be some space on the right. Put your name there too. Put your name at the top right. Underline it. And now make a list. Maybe you haven't done the same things that this person has done, but maybe you have done the same kind of things that this person has done. Or maybe there's simply some things that you have done. Write those down. Or maybe you bring some just simple differences to the table. Maybe you bring a little bit of your own weirdness or your own awkwardness or whatever it is. Write those things down. Now, take a long look at that list. You didn't know it, but in front of you there's a fireplace. It is scorching hot. Take that list, wad it up in your hand, feel the paper, its sharp edges. Throw that thing into the fire. So, will you take a step forward to better relationships and living out of an undivided heart? Or will you go back to the tension, the facade, the brokenness? God is inviting us to see people differently by helping us see ourselves differently. No barriers. We're all sinners, also all loved and forgiven freely when we say yes to him. God gives us common ground to renew relationships and to build something new. Let's pray. Father, thank you, Lord, for your message of forgiveness that extends to all, Lord. This is not a message to unbury regrets, to live in sadness, but to step forward into joy because, God, your grace and your love, they're so big. And surprise, surprise, it's not just grace and love to us as individuals. It gives us the power and the opportunity, Lord, to reach across the aisle, to see people differently, and to have freedom to engage people wherever they're at, wherever they come from, however different they are. So, Lord, I know that still requires courage, so that's what I pray. I pray for courage in our hearts to do that kind of thing, wherever we go, wherever we find ourselves. Lord, give us the